Welcome all. So very nice to see you. I love this nice crowded group today. Thank you for all those joining for whom the hour is not necessarily the best. Like Luis, for whom it's very early. I'm sure there are some people for whom it is quite late at night. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate you being here. Before we dive into today's session, I would like to introduce yet again our Gate to Fair Trade Fashion. I'm sorry, initiative. So it's an international initiative designed to strengthen the visibility, the resilience, and market access for fair trade fashion members and artisan enterprises around the world. It's a collaboration between WFTO Europe, and Polish Fair Trade Federation with the support from Amani Foundation. The aim here is to help fair trade producers navigate a very rapidly changing fashion landscape while creating new opportunities for growth and market access. You know, as sustainability expectations, bio requirements, and regulatory frameworks continue to evolve, many of us are being asked to demonstrate practices which we might be sometimes implementing, but not necessarily documenting or not necessarily aware of everything that's being asked. To help address this gap, Gate to Fair Trade Fashion team, I would say, developed a series of practical toolkits designed specifically for the realities of our fair trade members. So today we will be presenting you those tools. This toolkit series is composed of three different documents, one around the brand and producer collaboration, one around sustainability in fashion, and one around especially the European regulation and the compliance. So I'm hoping that you will be enjoying this presentation. Michael, would you like to add anything to that?
I think it's pretty comprehensive. I think we can move on.
So I'm going to pass the mic to Sarah Collins, who will be introducing the first of our toolkits. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a small second. Can you all see my screen? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
It's really
perfect. So welcome and introduction. That's what we're doing now. Presentation of the toolkits, and then we will have a long Q&A session. So please, you can write your questions in the chat. But at the end, we will have a longer dedicated time. You guys can ask any questions you have regarding each and every one of the toolkits, and we will try to answer your question. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Sarah Collins, who's going to present the first of our three toolkits around the brand producer collaboration. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Isabella. Yes, I'm really pleased to be presenting the Brand Producer Collaboration Toolkit. This toolkit is a practical guide to building successful and brand producer partnerships. The toolkit's been designed for brands looking to build long-term partnerships with producer groups, as well as producer groups looking to connect and strengthen their partnerships with brands. So there's the two sides to this toolkit, and the goal is really that it should provide clear guidance for both producers and brands. We know that successful collaborations require more than great products, so it's important that the toolkit tackles some of the common issues that we know arise in production partnerships. Some of these could be misaligned expectations, unclear communication, and a lack of structure, which can lead to unnecessary challenges for both parties. It is intentionally focused on providing step-by-step advice and tools so that both producers and brands can implement these practices into their processes easily. So just to run through what you can expect in the toolkit, we have an introduction to the purpose of the toolkit and guidance how to use it. We've got some of the key themes listed there on the slides. So the long-term partnerships, co-creation and product development, sampling, costing and quality expectations, ethical storytelling, fair collaboration, and responsible sourcing. We really want the outcome of this to be long-term successful partnerships. So we've tried to use in our experience and insights from brands and producers that we've worked with over the years to provide some really clear advice. So the first section really is the brand readiness section, which focuses on a self-assessment checklist, collaboration models explained, pricing guidance, timelines, and some key ethical procurement essentials. We then have a section that's focused more for the producers, and within that there's the producer capacity checklist, insights on what brands expect from their production partnerships, a producer presentation template, sample and prototype guidelines, and fair trade friendly costing templates. Some producer red flags and how to avoid them. These are never really intentional practices, but we find that is part of that miscommunication. So some red flags that we see that come up and how producers can avoid these moving forward is really practical and focused. And then the last section is a co-creation guidance section, where we have the workflow, a brief template, workshop guidance with some really valuable insights on ethical storytelling and important advice on IP and design right basics. So we really want the toolkit to be useful and in developing brand producer partnerships that are built to last. If you've got any questions on this toolkit, you can ask me those now. I am having a few tech issues. I might have to drop out and come back in on my phone, but yeah, happy to answer questions now or later at the end as well.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And just to add for all, Sarah has been in the middle of those brand relationships and collaboration. I'm sure many of you already know her have been working with her on some projects. But this toolkit is really a collection of what we see on the ground, what problems we heard of and we knew about, and trying to translate that into some practical tools to solve those issues. So Sarah has an extensive experience working in between the brands and the producers. So I think, I hope that you will find this useful, and both for brands and the producers, that you will be able to use that information. Yes, and we will give. Sure. Go on, Sarah.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, actually, as a brand, it would be really interesting to read the producer side as well, because you can learn from their perspective and vice versa. I think it should really give you insights of a cohesive relationship and what both parties are looking to achieve within that.
Yeah. So as we said, we're going to be answering questions at the end. I really encourage everyone to download. We'll give you the QR code. Those guidelines, those toolkits, I'm sorry, are available on the WFTO website. So please download. We very much welcome some feedback. So you can send us an email, and we're happy to adjust, add more if needed. So we're very much looking towards hearing back from you. I will now talk about the second toolkit, which is about sustainable fashion and circular business. The purpose of this toolkit is not to turn fair trade producers into sustainability experts overnight. Do manage your expectations, but it is to help the producer groups, and especially our WFTO members, to recognize the strengths they already have, understand the changing market landscape, and communicate their value more effectively to buyers. So why did we create this toolkit? Over the past few years, the language of sustainability has become increasingly complex. Buyers are asking about circularity, traceability, due diligence, carbon footprints, digital product passports, responsible sourcing, etc., etc. So for many of us, this can feel quite overwhelming. You know, yet when we look very closely, many fair trade enterprises have been practicing key elements of sustainability already for decades. You know, fair payment, long-term relationship, transparency and traceability, and women's economic participation, community impact, responsible production, upcycling, recycling, etc., etc. So this toolkit really is here to show us and to show you that first of all, we're not starting from zero, and we need to understand that we are actually very well positioned to lead even that conversation around sustainable fashion and circular business. Just very quickly, why do I think and why do we think that fair trade producers are already ahead of the game is because of our 10 fair trade principles we are obeying by. And the fact that we have a guarantee system, we've been certified, verified, so we are keeping those records already. We have that data and information which we're in need. And we are also the pioneers of experimenting with new processes, new things to advance circularity, sustainability, and fair fashion. So what's inside of the toolkit? So this one is quite long. It's organized in 7 practical chapters. It begins by explaining the general concept of sustainable fashion in simple and accessible language. And then we explore where impact happens in fashion value chains, what buyers are increasingly asking for, how to measure impact in a simple way, how to improve already existing sustainability practices, how to communicate sustainability without greenwashing, greenhushing, social washing, etc., etc., and how to prepare our businesses for future market expectation. So again, through this toolkit, we try to focus on practical actions rather than theory. I wish we had more pages to show the beautiful examples from our network. We might create a sequel, which is kind of demonstrating people from our WFTO community who are excelling and who are leading those conversations and doing amazing things. And a very short final thought, you know, sustainability is often presented as something new, but for many of us, it's not. For most of us, it's not, I would say. Many of the values now being promoted through sustainability frameworks have always been part of fair trade, have always been part of who we are due to those fair trade principles and what we're doing. So the opportunity ahead is not to try to become somebody else, but to put front and center stage the amazing practices, the amazing principles we're all obeying by to demonstrate that we are indeed pioneers and sustainable bunch of amazing enterprises. So I hope we can recognize our strength, advance where it needs to advance, and then learn how to communicate effectively to the markets about that. I hope this toolkit helps you achieve exactly that. And thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions at the end. And I will pass the floor now to the WFTO team to continue with the 3rd toolkit. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Isabella. I'm Mikkel from Mikkel Nogard from WFTU Europe. I think many of you know me, but just for the record and the recording, I and my colleague Jules Uldrich, who's with us as well, will delve a bit into the compliance and EU legislation toolkit. And I just wanted to reiterate, as Isabella said, more or less, please put your questions in the chat, or don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. We can more easily make sure to address them at the very end of the webinar. Good. So we've also put together a toolkit on some of the most pertinent recent EU legislation that is taking effect these years and is affecting a range of fair trade enterprises, but in particular those working within fashion. It seems in recent years, and maybe in particular this year, that there's a lot of concern about what this legislation will mean, or means already for fair trade enterprises who think, for many of you, are already doing your very best to compete with companies that do not have the same approach to sustainability, to human rights and environmental friendliness as you do. And whether this will be an additional challenge because it introduces, in some cases, additional paperwork simply and administrative reporting duties that I'm sure many would be without. What we want to do with this toolkit is, first of all, to help you make sense of the legislation that we find is relevant for most of you. But also to see the opportunity that lies in them, and that perhaps we cannot avoid that there's a bit of additional burden from it, but they will be for all, also your competitors, to be clear. And in many cases, as Isabella also mentioned, this is really just, in many cases for you, will just mean a requirement to document a lot of what you're already doing. So you will, in rare cases, will you have to start implementing new practices. And in those cases, I'm confident to say that for most of the time, they will be similar to practices you already are used to working with and implementing. So it will not be a huge organizational change for you. And we want to make sure that you understand this point in particular. And really, as in the most important point from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic, especially not from these EU legislations. I think you can go to the next slide now. Thank you. Yes, we'll get to what legislation is there in just a moment. But I think maybe Jules, if I can ask you to take over from here.
Absolutely. Good
Thanks.
afternoon, everyone. So just to continue on what Mikkel said, there is a sort of change in the EU legislative landscape. And key themes that we see occurring is that there is a need for increased transparency, increased accountability from corporate enterprises, and also higher standards. And this translates into legislation on deforestation, on eco-design in different ways, which is what we will be introducing shortly. But rather than just additional burden, it's also an opportunity, especially because many of the practices that you already have are already in line with the new legislation. And this makes you not only a safe choice for wholesale buyers, but it also means that it is more about translating and making sure that you communicate what you're already practicing in a proper and in a clear way, rather than having to change fundamentally. And showcasing that you are, as it says, ahead of the legislative curve will also strengthen your profile. Next slide, please. So the logic and the structure of the toolkit is that there's 4 legislations being discussed. But just a brief note ahead of this, it gets quite technical. So this is really just an introduction to help you understand the general trends. But I would recommend that you look into the toolkits if you have a minute to really better understand the deeper structure, because it gets quite technical at times. So what we see in the EU bubble is that there's a political movement towards increased transparency and accountability. You also see this reflected in the laws, which is a positive development, because this creates a more level playing field. Because it means that bigger companies who aren't practicing fair trade principles yet are increasingly having to comply with this as a standard, which is a positive development. And the public also increasingly wants to see and understand how their products have been produced and if they've been produced properly. However, there's also been a lot of change in the EU institutions with increasingly right-wing forces and with attempts from big companies to stop this trend towards more fair trade legislation. There's been quite a few changes in the legislation. So this toolkit is also just to understand the general trends and directions in which we're going with this legislation. But unfortunately, you also have to note that this is subject to change, and we will also try to accommodate for this in the toolkits. So in the coming laws that I will be discussing, I'll quickly introduce what each law means, what minimal compliance requires for you, and where opportunities are. A quick technical note. I use the word legislation here, but in EU law, there's a differentiation between a directive and a regulation. I won't get into too much detail, but you're lucky enough to have 2 directives and 2 regulations being introduced. So it is important to differentiate a bit. What it means for a regulation is that the law is uniformly adopted across the EU. So it is not up to member states to make changes or decide how to implement it. So it's more centralized and harmonized. In the case of a directive, there's more chance for different interpretations. So especially with the final law that we'll be discussing, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in the MCO directive, for example, there is more variation possible in that member states implement the law differently. So that's just a key distinction to consider in a very brief difference between the two. Next slide, please. So then the first law is known as the CSDDD, or the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. This is a very important law because it's one of the first key laws that makes responsible business conduct a legal requirement. It actually only applies to very large companies operating in the EU. So we're talking with more than 4.5 billion in turnover. So you likely won't have to comply with this and assess whether there's a risk of adverse human rights or environmental impacts. And they have to go through the supply chain and take a risk-based approach to see where these risks may be. The risk-based approach requires 2 steps. There's first a scoping exercise, so big companies generally understand where may my risks be. And then based on this scoping exercise, they have to do a more in-depth assessment of the high-risk areas. They're allowed to prioritize this. What this means is that if you have a longer supply chain, we see that the risks may, for example, be in the place where raw materials are sourced, and then to devote more attention towards addressing the risks for human rights or environmental impacts in this place. Even if, as a fair trade company, you're not in the scope of the law, you may still be affected as a supplier or producer. Because for this in-depth assessment, big companies might need information from you to better understand what does the risk entail and what does it mean require to remediate and resolve it. Because just identifying it is not enough. They also have to take measures to really end this impact. So you may receive information requests. The EU is very keen on not putting too much burden on SMEs, some small businesses and small other enterprises. So there are limits to how much can be asked from you. And this is more detailed in the toolkit. So why we're discussing this law is because it is a big development, and it also provides a clear opportunity for you. Not only does it improve a level playing field, but it also means that you can use your existing practices of traceability, of certification systems, documentation, to support buyer relationships and reduce the burden of replying to information requests. You're simply already more prepared, and this makes you a more attractive partner when working with companies that have to comply with this law. And we're moving on to the second law. Could we move to the next slide? Thank you. Which is the EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation. And the goal of this legislation is that no products are sold on the European market that are linked to deforestation or forest degradation. It includes quite a few different products, including coffee, cocoa, palm oil, and leather. But again, like I mentioned before, this is also subject to political changes. And for example, now there's a change that might again remove leather. So it's good to keep track of what exactly is included in the EUDR. This applies to all companies selling products that may involve a product that could be linked to deforestation. So it's not just for big companies, it's for all enterprises. All products have to be deforestation or degradation risk-free. Moreover, you also have to make sure that before placing this product on the European market, that it is produced in accordance with the local legislation. So this also means that if a country in the global south has different standards, then you also have to comply with these, and you cannot simply source here. And it also has to be covered by a due diligence statement. So each individual product or product derivative has to comply with these three main criteria. The EUDR introduces also a system of high, low, and standard risk countries. And what this means is that there's less stringent requirements for you as a company in case of a low risk country, which means that there's a simplified due diligence regime, which is convenient. With a high risk and standard risk, you still have to take those regular steps. And just important to mention that for the due diligence statement, this will require information collection, including geolocation details. It gets quite technical, but there's tools to help you do this. There's the requirement of doing a risk assessment, and in case a risk is identified, risk mitigation. Because again, if there is a risk taking place and occurring, this means the product cannot be sold on the European market. So it really has to be deforestation free. This is quite a strict and uniform regulation in that sense. And ESPR, Ecodesign for Sustainable Product Regulation. Bear with me as we move from trees to cotton. The goal of the ESPR is to improve eco-design of products and product transparency and to encourage circularity. The difference between a directive and a regulation becomes important here because this regulation is really a framework regulation. It provides the skeleton, so to say, for implementing this move towards more eco-design. But it means a lot of things are still being developed. A lot of requirements are still being shaped, and the Commission will only gradually introduce product group specific requirements. Because for cotton, there will be different eco-design requirements than for electronics, as you can understand. Nearly all products are covered by the ESPR, and it includes also the components of each product. The only product that's really not included is food. So what this means is that there's not only this focus on product group specific requirements that are being introduced, but also the structure, for example, for the digital product passport, which we'll get to in a second. So then for the eco-design criteria, which will be gradually established, there's two types of requirements. There's the performance and information requirements. Performance requirements mean that your product has to comply with certain levels of performance. Information requirements means that you have to be able to communicate and document certain information on your products in a different way. So examples of these could be that the percentage of recycled materials or how to care for a product. So there's two different sets. And the digital product passport is a central location in which you have to communicate on these information requirements. Increasingly, all products will have to comply with a digital product passport, which is really quite an innovative step because it means that there will be a small QR code or a different type of carrier on the product that helps consumers to directly get a more detailed report of how this product has been produced, where it's coming from, under what conditions, but also how to take care of it and the sustainability impacts. So it's really like quite a comprehensive report. And as the DPP, it might sound like quite a big step, and in a way it is, but this is also, again, what we mentioned before about communicating things that you're already doing as a fair trade enterprise. So this won't happen overnight. This is really gradually being introduced. And it's good to know that this will be on the horizon in the coming years. And the good news is that as the ESPR is very much aligned with fair trade values such as transparency, sustainability, and responsible production. So moving forward, we would recommend that you focus on how your enterprise collects, documents, and communicates sustainability information, both regarding the environmental aspects and the social aspects. And another opportunity is to contribute to commission surveys. So fair trade perspectives are included in the process of making these requirements. Because this is still very much in the development, so there's really an opportunity for you to contribute and thereby use your voice to help shape this and make sure that it's both insightful, what you're doing, meaningful, but that it's also doable, because that's of course a balancing act, and that's why we're also encouraging you to take part in this advocacy effort. And the final law.
Can I just add to this, Jules, because I think this is really important, and just to say that if any of you, I mean, it can seem overwhelming to understand how exactly to contribute to consultations and to feedback processes for EU regulation and EU legislation. In that case, please don't hesitate to write to us at WFTO Europe. We're in close contact with the FTAO, of course. The FTO is on a board that helps advise on the development of the criteria within the ESPR. And we're very happy to help either integrate your feedback into the consultations, or to help you submit to the consultations yourself, because usually the more we can, the more different individuals or organizations that submit to these consultations, the better the impact. So long as we say, similar things, and the FTAO, as part of the board that advises on the with the Commission that advises on the development of the criteria, can also really point to this and say, look how much feedback you got from different enterprises that say exactly what we've been telling you. And this really has an impact, even if you might feel that you're just one out of a million that might or might not submit feedback to these consultations. We do see that there's an impact, and it helps convince policymakers in taking into consideration the perspectives from your side as well.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. It's a very good point indeed. To also make it more concrete on how you can contribute, not just that it's an option. So thank you for that. We're moving on to our final law for today, which is actually 1.5 law. So you're in luck, because originally there was the Green Claims Directive, which you may have heard of. And this directive was intended to limit greenwashing, the practice of presenting a product or a service as more sustainable than it actually is, by coating it either in visual leaves of sustainability or more concrete sort of generic verbal claims. The Green Claims Directive future is uncertain, and the Commission has announced its intention to withdraw it, which means that it likely won't be become law. But what has become law already is the EMCO Directive, Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition. This has also been part of a bigger discussion within WFTO, so you may have heard about it before. But in short, the EMCO Directive will start applying from September 2026. So this is already in 3 months. And the goal of this directive is to prevent greenwashing, just like the Green Claims Directive, and also to prevent consumers being misled. And it does so by defining more stringent requirements for when and how to make claims about your products. So it gets it takes a bit of time to understand how the logic works. What it means is that your claims, whether about green environmental aspects or about social aspects, they have to be relevant, specific, and verifiable. And then in the toolkit, we have a list of questions that you can ask yourself before including a claim on your product. And the EMCO Directive also introduces that if you are part of a sustainability scheme and you want to include this label on your product, that this label is developed in line with the requirements for certification schemes, which includes third-party monitoring by an external party. So, for example, in a few months, WFTO members will be able to say that they are fair trade certified, if they are in fact certified. So there's this transition going on. So just to illustrate green and social claims that are more likely to be accepted and that may raise more doubts, I've made a little overview on the bottom right. So what will more likely be accepted is to say that you are 100% certified fair trade if you are in fact producing a product that has been 100% certified fair trade. Being certified is not enough, it also has to comply, of course. Or you can say that this package is made with 80% recycled materials. What you see here is that it's made specific, and it gives a percentage, which means it's more specific and it can be verified, the information. Claims that are less likely to be acceptable is, for example, that your product, or by buying your product, the consumer is empowering and supporting women. What is maybe true, it is quite vague and it doesn't specify, like it cannot be easily verified. And this is really what the EMCO directive wants to move away from. Another one that we are not sure if it is okay is that we pay our workers fairly. Paying a fair wage, a living wage, is considered a requirement for becoming a fair trade enterprise, of course, and I'm sure you do so. But what fairness is again can be ambiguous for people outside of the fair trade movement. And this is why it's good to consider, for example, for these claims, if it's included in the standard, the sustainability scheme that you are certified by, then you can make the claim. But if it's more in the middle, then we would recommend that you make the claim more specific. So, for example, adding that we pay our workers fairly according to these principles, which means A, B, and C. So this is a very brief introduction. We have more examples in the toolkit, and there's also a document for the end. In the end, I can have a list directive.
Could you repeat the last sentence, Jules? We had I mean, you froze a bit.
Apologies. So what I was saying is that in the toolkit, there will be more context for which sort of claims are acceptable or not. And there's also a document added from the Dutch Consumer Authority, which provides a more in-depth, more contextualized list of examples to help you really differentiate between these. Yes. And that also then, is there anything you want to add on this point, Mikkel?
Just briefly, because this came up in the town hall that was held by WFTO Global yesterday, so I might as well mention it here. Jules, in the toolkit, as Jules mentioned, there is a reference to the Dutch Consumer Authority, which is the one enforcing this in the Netherlands. And the WFTO is based in the Netherlands, so primarily this has been the point of contact for WFTO Global. But keep in mind that each member state is the one that will enforce this directive. After it's been translated into each member state's law. So if you're based in another EU country or your main market is in another EU country, it's preferable to check with that authority directly. However, I think the point with the Dutch Consumer Authority's document is that it's in English, no, Jules?
Yeah, that's true.
And not all EU member states will be so kind.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also just introduces the general logic of working with these claims. But no, it is good to mention that it will be enforced differently.
Indeed. Well, yes. Indeed, enforced. It could be enforced differently. The rules are supposed to be the same. Just to be very, very clear, because some people think that it means there are different criteria in different countries. There are not. But because of different legal systems, different legal practice, etc., there could be a slight difference in how it's interpreted or enforced in the specific country. So you will have to take directions from the authority in the given member state where you are selling.
Exactly. I can no longer see the slide. There we go. Perfect, thank you. Then that brings us to our final, very brief slide on the legislative toolkit, which is how to use this toolkit and some further readings. As we've mentioned before, the regulatory changes are ongoing, and this requires your enterprise to be active and moving along with the curve. As a fair trade enterprise, you're already sort of ahead of this curve, but it's good to make sure that you also understand the more technical side and how things have to be communicated. We hope the toolkit offers you a clear overview of these different key laws, so you know how to ensure compliance. And it's really just a starting point, so you know which concepts to consider. And just to reiterate, as a fair trade enterprise, you are already well on your way. And it really also just offers a lot of opportunities to make your fair trade enterprise more visible, and so consumers can really appreciate how you're navigating your business. So thank you for that. Then I think I don't have anything else to add right now, which brings us then to the Q&A. So I don't know if there's any questions, and I believe this QR code is for accessing the toolkit, but I haven't tested it myself. Okay.
Yes, I sincerely hope it works. So if you scan this QR code, you will be directed to the WFTO website where all three toolkits are present. This information will be communicated to you via the WFTO newsletter as well, and we will be sharing those on social media. So if you are not able to access those, I think it's working. You will have that information done, and indeed now I can open the floor for the Q&A. So I'm going to stop my sharing the screen. I'm so sorry. And now the floor is yours. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Luis is making a question, I can see. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jules, but I don't see any other questions so far in the chat. But Jules, maybe you'd like to, sorry, Luis, maybe you'd like to take the mic and state your question.
I believe, hello to everyone, it's a great tool. I think it will help us. What I'm trying to say is that will help producers and traders from the south because kind of will guide us. WFTO is looking to update our warranty system to the new European regulations. No, so I think that there's a good click there. It's not I think a question, but recognizing how important is this tool. No, I think it's a good thing because we kind of guide us into what we need to do, even though some of us do already, as Isabella said in the beginning, but some of us are not aware that what we're doing in recycling or things like that can be presented as something important for this new regulations. So we need to recognize and organize ourselves. So thank you for the toolkit.
Thank you, Luis. Very much appreciated. And as Isabella has written in the chat, please feel free to unmute. And yes, Abdul.
Hi, Michael. My name is Manav. Hi, Luis. Michael, I used to work for WFTO actually a long time ago. Yeah, actually just want to have feedback on the brand toolkit, the collaboration toolkit. I think it's very useful and practical, but I'm curious about whether you will have some sort of downloadable template for us, for example, like for the product brief templates or the producer capability templates, or sort of like MOU template with the producer, because sometimes like working together with the like artisans, for example, in Indonesia, it's a bit difficult, if there is no template. So it's going to be easier if there is a sort of template that we can use. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Maybe I'll answer that. So some of those templates are already in the document. So it's just for you to copy paste of what's there. Now, if you are in needing something in particular, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're happy to send that over to you as much as we can and as much as we have.
Okay, thank you.
Viviana?
Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry, my setup is a bit weird. Thanks a lot. I just wanted to say I'm from Ecogarantito, which is the Italian Association for Trade Organizations, and we've been also doing something very similar. We've been trying to map European regulations and see in terms of like corporate sustainability and see how fair trade is doing in that respect, of course, with reference to our Italian movement. And I haven't read the toolkit, obviously, so I might ask something that's obvious. But firstly, I was wondering how you found the comparison with how fair trade is doing in terms of due diligence and the regulation itself. Because what we found in Italy is, yes, there's some sort of due diligence that happens already, but it's not really UNGPs aligned at all. There isn't really a risk-based approach that we could see, at least in our Italian movement. And secondly, I was wondering about the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And And the reason why I'm asking about that is that, of course, most or all fair trade organizations will be out of scope, obviously, but they might still be in the supply chains of companies that will be in scope of that. And reporting usually is quite a low-hanging fruit. So I was wondering what you thought of that. And thanks again.
Yeah, I'll be happy to address this, Jules. If I can ask you to jump in if there are any comments outside of what I'll say. On your first question, mainly before CSDDD was approved and before it was, well, even before it became actually a proposal by the Commission. So we're back in like 22 or something, or even further back. No, wait, 21, I think. We also made a position paper from the WTO Europe side, but thanks to the help of someone working at Global at the time, doing exactly a comparison between the WTO standard and the UNDP guiding principles, the UN Business and Human Rights guiding principles on due diligence. I think the main highlight in terms of discrepancies there, no, sorry, I'm confusing things, but I think one key concern that came up was the existence of what do you call it, like a scheme where you can announce or highlight suspicion of malcompliance, miscompliance. So in the end, it seemed that the fair trade, what's it called? Sorry, I've really
Do you mean like a
lost the word.
whistleblower?
What again?
Like a whistleblower mechanism?
Yeah, essentially. So in WTO we call it something specific. We have the awareness, the accountability watch, I think we call it, was deemed to be sufficiently in line with this. And as far as I could understand from the analysis at the time, this was the main kind of highlight of where there could be a major discrepancy. I couldn't speak to what that looks like in terms of the Italian members. And there may be parts of the UN guiding principles where the WTO current setup of the standard might fall short. But as you may also know, the CSDDD, for example, is not in itself sufficiently built on the guiding principles either. There's a lot of discrepancies because of political nitpicking and sudden changes towards the very end before it was approved and so on. So in that sense, we don't see that as a concern. That was for that reason not really on our radar. I think if you truly go through the guiding principles from the UN, of course, there are also, of course, and we must be very honest about this, things that we should do better in the fair trade movement. But compared to other companies, we'd say that the changes needed to be undertaken by fair trade enterprises are relatively similar to practices already practiced, and so less, let's say, consuming of time and resources than it would be for competitors, for example. But this is not to understate the fact that there may be points where indeed we also members would also need to change their practice or up their game, if you will, to be fully compliant. Now, in terms of scope, as you say, and we really have to stress maybe that it is not impossible that you could be included in the supply chain of a company that would be in scope, and so that the rules would be extended to you. We are also hoping indeed that fair trade enterprises will be more viewed as, more interesting partners for this type of companies who would have massive capacity to place orders from suppliers, and amongst them fair trade enterprises, because they are, they can more easily provide information on, working conditions in the supply chain, remuneration standards, etc., etc., that some companies are only really beginning to set up for themselves. There would be then, or there's still the risk that there could be points where they would need to up their game as well. But I would say let's also be very clear that there are just so few companies in scope, especially in the CSDDD, but even in the CSRD, that it's not a matter of urgent concern. But to take full advantage of the opportunity that this offers, in our view, of being a more lucrative and safe bet partner for this kind of companies who could really place big orders, potentially, then of course we would encourage that everybody looks into where could be the which can be different from enterprise to enterprise. I think there's a very varied landscape there of who is strong on which points and maybe weaker in other points, or where they would need to change some practices to be fully compliant. I'm sorry, that's a very long answer, but I hope that the key points are covered. I think it's very also maybe for those either other of you present or listening to the recording afterwards, that this can be a key point. This is why we maybe hope you will take a little bit of an extra look at the CSDDD, not because we think you will likely be in scope, but it could still be to your advantage.
Yes, I would like to jump in, if I may. Again, yes, for most of us, we will be totally out of scope, and even those huge companies, there's very few of us who are part of their value chain or their supply chain. That being said, this is an amazing marketing tool we can use. I'm seeing it on the everyday basis already, where we can state that this is where the trend is going. More and more company hopefully will be in scope soon. We have the advantage of. So I would like to present a very specific example. Because of this directive, some of the certifications and frameworks are already taking steps to add those components into their certification. So I'm talking in particular about the green certifications in the hospitality industry, Green CLI, Green Globe. Those are hotel-specific certification who are already implementing in their 2026 criteria some of those same themes than there is in that big legislation. What does it mean? That means that the hotels who are already applying and who are part of their certification scheme do have to apply those and do have to work and do have to source from buyers who are able to reply to that. So it's a ripple effect. And I think we have a lot of things to take advantage of that. And even though we're not really in scope, there is a global trend, a global wind blowing into that direction. And this is why I think as well, it was very important, and it is important to you to have a look at it. Where is it going? What are the views? Because of that regulation, the consumer habits, the consumer trends are going to be changing as well, hopefully. Thank you.
Jules, will you just address the CSRD or just for good measure?
Yes, of course.
Thanks.
Because Jenny also mentioned the CSRD. So for those unfamiliar, the CSRD stands for Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive. So it's related but distinct from the due diligence directive, but they sort of work hand in hand. So as with due diligence, the goal is to avoid the human rights and environmental impacts. The reporting is really for big companies that are in scope. I don't think there's any fair trade enterprise in the scope. They have to report on their risks according to the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And they have to report on their supply chain specifically. This means that as a smaller company, even though you're not in scope, you may still receive information requests. So similar to the due diligence law where you can receive information requests, this also exists in the CSRD. It's also mentioned in the toolkits briefly, but basically the EU is working on publishing a voluntary SME standard. So this is a limited list of data points, and in-scope companies cannot ask information from you that goes beyond this standard. The standard isn't published yet, so what it exactly entails fully, we haven't included, but it's just really good for you to know that they cannot send out blanket questionnaires or surveys. The questions that they ask, both for due diligence and for CSRD, they have to be targeted and reasonable. So I think this is important to consider. I hope that answers your question, Viviana, or were you pointing towards something else, just to check?
Yeah, it does. It does answer. Just wanted to point out, I really think it's, yeah, as you said, it's an opportunity to, go a bit
Exactly.
further and potentially also have some sort of a reporting standard for fair trade organizations one day, because I think we're, half of the way there with our new WFTO standard and all that. So
sounds like a good idea. I'll make sure to write it down. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jules. And I'm just typing in an answer to Dibiarma, but I can also just maybe briefly say here what I will put it in writing too. But the question is it right that in the UK, the World Fair Trade Organization is represented by BAFTs, and basically they have different regulations in comparison with the EU? Is that right? Not exactly. BAFT is a member of the WTO, and it's a network of fair trade shops, I believe, but shouldn't be taken as an official representative of the WTO in the UK, as far as I'm aware, at least. And in terms of different regulations in the UK and the EU, technically, yes. I mean, I will say that Brexit took effect in 2020, and although that's 6 years ago, in 2020, when Brexit took effect, all at the time existing EU law became British law. And naturally, the Brits have then had the opportunity to change those regulations following that. But there have been many different, let's say, issues that have hampered that a little bit, notably how to deal with the Northern Ireland being, having an open border with the rest of the EU, or rather with the EU, but not and then still not wanting to be part of the customs union, for example. So let's say, yes, you couldn't assume that EU law and British law is the same, or regulation is the same, but you will find most often that it's very similar, let's say. But of course, it's important to check for potential differences. I hope that answers your question. If you have yeah, okay, great. Of course, if there's any specific point on this, you can feel free to ask, but we're maybe not so well versed in UK law, just to be clear. And other questions, of course, please feel free.
I guess everyone has to take the time to digest, read all those toolkits. That's quite a lot of reading. I do give you that. We are free to reply to your questions. You can send an email, you can contact WFTO office in Europe, WFTO Global as well. So we're very happy to support you further. And I think I'm not going to jump too much ahead, but if there is a need, if there is more questions, we might think about reconvening a short webinar a little bit further down, or if there is any major change, some of those regulations are still being shaped, things are changing as we go. This is also why we waited a little bit before publishing those toolkits. So if there is any major change or if anything is happening, we will be updating those. So as soon as there is an update, we will, of course, through WFTO channels, let you know that this is happening. And if there is no further questions, everybody is very thoughtful and very serious on the other end. we can now maybe close this meeting. So last call. Anyone else want to say something, share something, ask something? Please unmute yourself freely. Okay, I'm taking the silence. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sarah, Jules, Mikel. I want to thank you as well, the WFTO global team, even though they're not here with us, they have been contributing to the project quite a lot. They're relaying that information to all of you, and they're doing an amazing job. And thank you for attending and giving us your time. We really hope that it is useful for you and for your businesses. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day, evening, morning.
And thank you too, Isabella. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you, everyone.